What's up, everybody? Tori McElhaney joined by Terrin, Waack, and we have a new face on the podcast network today. Well, I mean, I guess new voice if you're only listening to this via Apple Podcasts.
Don't make it complicated.
Or Spotify. Will McFadden joining not just the podcast network, but also our editorial staff as our new lead editor / staff writer. Will, officially, let me welcome you to the team.
The Ticketmaster
Studios.
podcast studio.
I'm so excited. Apparently, if you speak into a microphone enough, they invite you to come speak into a very fancy microphone in an awesome room in a crazy studio. So, no, I'm really excited to be part of the team and to be recording this podcast with you guys, to be part of such an amazing content group. Let's get started.
Here's the thing about Will is if you're a diehard Falcons fan, you probably know Will. Will is not a new name or a new face to you because Will has been in-house previously with us, and then he also had his own Falcons podcast and wrote a little bit for Falcoholic as well. So this is not new territory to you at all. This is actually your home base to a certain extent.
It's an offseason of like reunions, right?
Yeah.
You know, when Raheem Morris came back, I wanted to ask him yesterday in the final minicamp press conference, just like how long did it take for him to get used to all of the changes that are happening around here? Because it's every single day when I come in, it's like I'm used to the way things were 3 years ago, and so much has changed, including the room that we're sitting in currently.
Didn't exist.
But like new locker room, new cafeteria. So it's really cool to see how the organization has changed, but also, again, to see some of the familiar faces who have come back. So, yeah, it's been really, really fun the last couple of days.
It's interesting because I think you actually have, because of this and because of your history with the organization, you actually have a perspective that I find very interesting because you covered the team before I got here, before Terrin got here, and you were covering the team back when Raheem was a position coach, back when he was a coordinator. So I'm curious now, you've been around him a couple days and you've seen the culture that he's brought to Atlanta upon his return. I'm curious from your perspective, what are kind of some comparisons and also contrasts of the Raheem Morris you knew 4, 5, 6 years ago to the guy standing in front of you today?
Yeah, I mean, what has stood out to me the most, honestly, is the fact that there are no contrasts. Like, he has been the same person this entire time. And going from being an assistant coach where, you know, you don't get to talk to them as frequently as you get to talk to, you know, a head coach or the coordinators or some of the more like high profile members of the staff. But when Raheem did work his way into then being the defensive coordinator and then the interim head coach, like it's the same guy. It's the same. He wears every single hat so naturally because he is himself. And that is the most important thing when you talk about an NFL locker room is players respond to, you know, like a genuine leader and a genuine character. I think there's a reason why his first initial team meeting, and I would encourage everybody to go check out that video if you haven't already. It's like 6 or 7 minutes. I was ready to run through a freaking brick wall for that guy.
Yeah.
Because he's just so charismatic. He's so fun and energetic. And I think that some of the things that I have noticed just over the last 3 days of kind of seeing how they operate with minicamp, it feels like it is a little bit more of that LA like vibe. Yeah. There's a little bit of a chill, relaxed atmosphere. And he has said that he's bringing over some of the things that he learned from LA. But if anything, I think that only enhances Raheem's kind of just natural state of being. It's cool to see him assuming this leadership position, but he's not necessarily putting on a front.
Yeah.
He is leading in the way that he is comfortable, and I think the team is really going to benefit from that.
Will makes a good point, too, about vibes are high.
Vibes are
high around here, and it's because, obviously, everywhere across the league, this is the time where the vibes are the best. No one's played a game. Everybody's just kind of like around getting work in and everything.
Everyone's going to win the Super Bowl.
Right. Everyone's winning the Super Bowl, of course, in April and May. It's like, yeah, of course. But Terrin, I'm really curious, your perspective, kind of what the last year, honestly, like 3 years too. Well, you've only been here for a year.
Yeah, wait,
so
what?
The last year for you, and now seeing kind of what Raheem Morris's culture looks like and how he's infused it since he got here back in January, February. I'm curious for you, as Will's talking about the vibes around the facility, how you view what Raheem Morris has done and kind of infiltrating the culture here a little bit.
The difference between last season and this season is completely different, and I don't think that's necessarily a knock on anyone who was around last season, because a lot of people are still the same. Hello, me here, you here.
Yeah.
Welcome, Will.
What's up?
But it's just Raheem's personality is so unique to who he is. I mean, he's bopping around. He's on our side of the building maybe more than he's on his own. Just kidding.
He has to technically walk through our side of the building in order to
Leave
get to
the technicality
cafeteria.
out of this. Let us have our moment. But it's just, it's a more, I want to say fun-go-lucky, because that sounds like he's not taking it seriously,
Right.
because he is. But,
Right.
like, I just think his personality is more of that let loose. Business is business when it's business.
When it's business time.
Yeah.
When it's
So,
time
like,
to work,
when
they
he's
work.
off the clock, he's off the clock.
Yeah.
Like, we were talking about where we're going for vacation. And he's over here like, Greece, Mexico, the lake. And I go, Wisconsin.
We live very different lives.
Yay. I'm more excited about mine anyways.
Right, yeah.
But it's just like he turns it on and off, but at the same time, he's consistent through it all, if that makes sense. Like, his personality is the same, but he can go from football mode to I am a human being mode and can talk to you about something that has nothing to do with the pigskin.
Yeah.
I'd been waiting to do that.
Nice. I'm glad
And
you
it's just, it's different.
Yeah.
It's different where I think last year it was maybe more of a business atmosphere day in, day out.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think it's, for me personally, you know, there are a lot of things that have happened over the course of this offseason. It hasn't felt like an offseason. If anything, I feel like we've been busier over the last 6 months than even I would say during the season, because during the season you're in such a like strict routine and you know exactly what's happening when it's happening. There are very, very few surprises, but literally we go into this offseason and it's new head coach, new coordinators, a lot of new faces in the building in terms of coaches, position coaches, everything like that. Then you get Kirk Cousins. Then you go and you get a trio of wide receivers and free agency. And then you got the draft and you get Michael Penix Jr., which everybody was talking about. And it's like, and then, I know, right?
Yeah, when can we breathe?
Yeah. And it's like,
July?
we haven't had a chance to really, I think, look back on what the last 6 months have been.
And appreciate it,
And
too.
and appreciate kind of everything that's transformed about the organization from January, Raheem Morris's first day, to where we are now that mandatory minicamp has officially come to a close. So I guess my question to you guys, I know that so every single week we do a question of the week, and it runs on Wednesdays on AtlantaFalcons.com around noon. And this week we kind of said, like, okay, the off season's over. Like, everybody's breaking for the summer. We'll come back in training camp, and there of course be a multitude of questions that we have to answer. But at this point in time now, like, what are your takeaways about what the Falcons have done over the last 6 months? And I actually wrote it down, all of our different points, and I'm going to start in the order that we wrote them in. So I'll start with mine. But mine was essentially like the Falcons and the work they've done at the quarterback position and getting out of what I have called quarterback purgatory, of the time from back in 2020, 2021, when you're having these questions about the future of the Falcons organization beyond Matt Ryan, and not knowing what a succession plan looks like. And then getting to the point where it's like, okay, you bring in Marcus Mariota, you bring in Desmond Ridder. Are either of those guys going to be a bridge to what's next? Is Desmond Ridder going to be what's next? And you get to the point where in the last 2 years, we've kind of just been like, something's got to bend a little bit. Like the quarterback position has got to, it's got to be figured out. Yeah. And that was if finding a new head coach for the Falcons in January was priority 1A, quarterback was 1B. And they go out and they get Kirk Cousins, like we said. They get Michael Penix Jr., spend a number 8 overall draft pick on him. And they retain Taylor Heineke. Looking at this quarterback room, to me, is fascinating because, and I said this, it's like, outside of the whole news breaking aspect of all of those things, I actually haven't talked a lot about the quarterback room as a whole because because I feel with Kirk Cousins, with Michael Penix Jr., with Taylor Heineke as an option, the Falcons did exactly what they wanted to do and said they wanted to do, which was secure that position not just for the short term but in the future. And obviously that could change 2 weeks into the season and I could have a completely different tone, but where they are right now and seeing how that group operates in practices, even without pads on and even without going even 50%, I feel like the Falcons have set themselves up with a quarterback room that feels as sure as it has in a few years. And that's something that, coming from the last 2 years, it was almost like a desperation that they needed to get to the point of having not just one key playmaker at that position, but multiple options that they could go to when things start breaking down. I'm curious kind of y'all's thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, you use purgatory. I've been kind of thinking about it as like a little bit of a valley, right? Like you go from Matt Ryan and when I was here, like they were talking about a succession plan back then, even though, you know, the expectation was that Matt still has a lot of good years left in front of him. You just never know when that cliff comes for a quarterback. Mm-hmm. And I think really the last year in particular, but kind of the last couple of years, you saw the limitations of what a roster that is maybe more complete and balanced than it was at the end of the Matt Ryan era when they were very offensive heavy and just had invested a lot of money in those players. You saw the limitations of kind of that approach when you don't have a quarterback who is able to, you know, maximize kind of what is around him, right? It's like that Trent Dilfer Ravens team. You know, you can have success that way, but they just never found that right formula. And so we'll kind of get to the opportunity cost of it all. But I think the Falcons did a great job of saying this is clearly the most important priority. Mm-hmm. There are others, but we need to get this right. And that's what they did.
Yeah. Terrin, I'm curious, like, as you've been out at practice, how does that group work together? When you're talking about Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix Jr., Taylor Heineke, those are the three that I'm talking about, but they also have a fourth. Like, but what do you see when you're out at practice?
Well, you normally see Kirk and Taylor working together because I'm thinking just back to yesterday when they had kind of the ones together and the twos together, and then you split the quarterback group of 4, 2 and 2, and they had Kirk Cousins and Taylor Heineke together. Shout out to Taylor still being here. I love those neon pajama pants at practice.
Gosh, there is no one who has. I use the word style very loosely here. Nothing against Taylor, but the Busch Light hat and sweatshirt.
I love it.
All the time.
I love it. And then you have Michael Penix Jr. and insert first name here, Paddock. Sorry. Over on the other side. And so that makes it tough to see how Penix and Cousins are interacting together in that sense. But when they are all together, you can see how they will communicate to each other. And at the same time, something that has stood out to me throughout all of this is Raheem Morris saying the onus, which is such a fun word.
Yeah, great word.
Is on Michael Penix Jr. to learn from Kirk Cousins, and it's not on Kirk Cousins to teach Michael Penix Jr.
Yeah.
And it's just, that's such an interesting way to put it because you would think it's a partnership, but it's not.
I was like, do you like that?
I do like it. I do, because Kirk's sole focus should be winning a championship, should be winning games, going week by week, being 100% healthy. If you add anything else, that plate could tip over. Yeah. And when it comes to Michael, his responsibility is solely learning and growing. Like, he doesn't have to worry about suiting up week 1 and going out there and taking a snap.
Yeah.
Not right now, at least. And so he just needs to grow and develop. And to do that, you have 35-year-old Kirk Cousins ahead of him to do so. So I really like that it was put that way. I think it kind of makes it where ideally Kirk doesn't have a little thing over his shoulder, kind of being like, is he gonna Mr. Steal your job instead of steal your girl? And that was made clear from day one that is not the intention, and I like that transparency.
Yeah, me too. I mean, they literally said from go.
Onus.
It's not. This is not a Kirk Cousins conversation. Like, it's not Kirk's responsibility to do anything outside of go out and be QB1.
But that's so interesting because we usually, when we talk about like
leaders
externally, when you talk about the quarterback transition plan, usually it is like under the guise of, all right, this person is coming in to be mentored by the established quarterback, right? Like if they had drafted somebody while Matt Ryan was still here, we would have been all talking about how great a mentor Matt Ryan is going to be. So it is interesting to see the club kind of say, hey, look, no, like the onus is on you. You know, you got to chase getting better. We want to see you be motivated and hungry. Kirk's got his own priorities that we like. He's already got his own deliverables that we have set for him. So
I think that's because Kirk is new to Atlanta. Like, I don't think we forget that, but it does change the dynamic automatically, because I know during the draft they kept saying like the Green Bay way. Well, this is the Green Bay way modified, because Kirk is new to Atlanta. He has to learn this offense. He has to learn the players. To throw in teaching someone new, how do you teach someone when you're still learning? So
it's the Kansas City way. It's the Alex Smith kind of like, but Alex Smith was a good kind of, I think,
Bridge
he and
to a
Kirk
certain
Cousins are similar
Right,
in that
yeah.
way.
Yeah.
But I think that's why it's on Penix rather than Cousins.
sure.
Yeah. So moving on, Will, I want to get to your answer from our question of the week this past week. You kind of talked about pass rush a little bit and how the Falcons are banking on the sum of their pass rush parts. I'm kind of curious what intrigues you about this defensive front when you're talking about pass rush. Because people, remember, pass rush doesn't only come from outside. There's a lot of really great interior pass rushers out there, Grady Jarrett included, which we'll get to Grady Jarrett in a little bit.
Don't steal my thunder.
No, that's why I said we're going to get to him. We're going to get
You
to
got
him.
Mr. Steal Your Girl and Mrs. Steal Your
Steal
Thunder.
your point.
No, I was talking a little bit about the opportunity cost with the quarterback decision, and I think it was absolutely the right call to go and invest the money in Kirk Cousins that you did, and then also to, it took some cojones to use that number 8 pick, but I think if you're pulling back, it's wise to lay the groundwork and maybe correct the wrong that you didn't get right the first time around with Matt Ryan. However, that did not leave many resources for them to go pursue the top tier pass rusher. And you can quibble with who was available as a free agent, who was really out there. The draft, I think NFL teams showed you by not taking a defensive player until pick 15.
Mm-hmm.
Liatu Latu, my guy, who I loved in the pre-draft process, going to take a little bit of a W on that one because he went first. But this just wasn't the defensive-heavy draft that, say, next year's draft is expected to be. So when you are a team that does have kind of a lack of a proven star caliber pass rusher, maybe this just wasn't the offseason to go about doing that. But what they did and what I like is that they added some different options that have some different flavors as they are kind of retweaking this defense, going back to a little bit of a 3-4 look, which was there under Dean Pease, went away under Ryan Nielsen when they brought in a few different body types. It's going to be an interesting bunch, but I almost look at this as a baseball team that doesn't necessarily have we've got a true middle reliever, then we got a setup man for the 8th inning, and then we've got Craig Kimbrell coming out of the bullpen to just shut it down. We know who our guys are. Instead, they're we have 8 dudes in the bullpen that we hope 4 of them are going to emerge,
Right.
but on any
We
given
don't know.
day,
Yeah.
we're going to lean into our strengths. We're
Yeah.
going to give these guys rests. We're going to get some fresh legs out there on the field. I think that's what you're going to see a lot from the defensive line and the outside linebackers. Guys like Zach Harrison getting in the mix, Taquan Graham going in alongside of Arnold Ebiketie and Lorenzo Carter, Braylon Trice getting in there, Brandon Dorless, all of the rookies that they drafted.
There you
I'm
go.
not going to pass up that opportunity.
Had
It's
to.
sitting right there for me.
Yeah.
So when you look at what Raheem Morris did last year with LA and a very young group and kind of getting the most out of them, that gives me some optimism that he can do something similar with, again, a little bit of an unproven group. And then the final bit of that is going to be the simulated pressures. I really think that the Falcons are going to be pretty high in their usage of simulated pressures. We saw Caden Ellis have a lot of success last year. Troy Anderson is back in the mix. He's got a lot of speed to burn. So it's not going to be one guy. It's going to be a committee approach. And last year they had 42 sacks, their most since 2004, with
Right.
a similar type of approach. So
Yeah.
it's not doom and gloom for them on the pass rush front, but they didn't go add that proven TJ Watt type of guy.
Here's the thing that you bring up too, and you talk about having fresh legs and everything like that. Something that's been very interesting. Here's the thing about OTAs and mandatory minicamp. The pads aren't on. Your evaluation of the trenches is non-existent.
Yeah.
You cannot evaluate.
It's so hard.
You can't evaluate where these guys are, how they're playing, how they're doing, how they're developing, because they're not tackling. Which, as a defense, that's what you do. It's what you do. So it's really hard to evaluate. But I think even in the evaluations, we can kind of see different groups working together. And it has been very evident that the Falcons have as much, if not more depth, on their front seven as they have had in years. And you can just tell by the rotation. And it's funny, too, because early on in OTAs, it was almost like they had different groups where it was okay, these are guys who have been in the league for 4+ years. They're all on a line together. Guys who have been in the league 3 years and less, they're on a line together. And then you mix and match, and then you're rotating
They've
guys
got
in.
subsections within the sub-packages within sub-packages.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that is indicative of kind of the front office and the work they've done to kind of do what you're saying, where it's piece together different parts and have different body types and have different guys who can do a little bit of different things, be a bit hybrid in that way. And I think that you don't know if it sets yourself up for success, But that's the hope as you kind of tweak and figure out, like, okay, like, who do we have? What are their strengths? How can we use them? And what does that look like in a rotation within even a series?
Yeah, that puts a lot on the coaching staff.
Yes,
like,
yeah.
But again, I like that. I like this coaching staff kind of betting on themselves to say, yeah, we've got to know the strengths and weaknesses for each of these guys, because there aren't a ton of players like a Grady Jarrett who can just do it all, do it really at a high level. So you got to know, here's how we want to deploy Zach Harrison, right? Here's how we want to deploy Braylon Trice. But I trust this coaching staff.
Terrin, Will brings up Grady Jarrett, and I want to get into kind of your response to this offseason takeaway question. We have not seen Grady Jarrett out on the field with this team. And that, I mean, for those who have been around Atlanta, even kind of just looking on from afar, you know who Grady Jarrett is. He's been one of the best defensive tackles in the league for a long time. But the Falcons were without him. He's still working back from a season-ending knee injury that he sustained in Week 8 of the 2023 season. He spoke, actually, for the first time this offseason on the last day of minicamp. He didn't practice, but he's here at the facility. And Terrin, you were sitting in on that press conference, and it was a very, I think, maybe emotional one. Can you kind of tell the people a little bit about what you learned about Grady and where he's at with his recovery?
For starters, when you think about it, he didn't have to talk because he didn't practice.
He didn't. Yeah.
So, like, that alone speaks volumes to who he is as an individual. And maybe not only that, but, like, how much he learned during this period, because it's been 7 months. And the timeline he was given was 9 months for recovery, that he got surgery in November. And 9 months from that is July. So you have to be right on schedule if you want to be participating in training camp. And that takes discipline. And he acknowledged that. He said, I got surgery, and the next day I began rehab. And he gave this example that was just like, it gives me the shivers because I'm like, I can't imagine that feeling, where he like sat on the edge and all he had to do was lift his leg. He couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Like he said, I put all my might and I couldn't do it. It felt like my leg was falling off. And I'm like, first of all, but
yeah, there's a reason I'm not in medicine.
And it's just to think he went from that to now walking around and knowing he will be ideally full go, maybe a little altercations at training camp, means he stuck to his regiment to a T. And he was vulnerable in the fact that, I think the quote that stood out to me most, and of course I'm not going to get it right word for word, but he was like, in this, I think I needed that in that moment. And that's him being like, the kind of glad the injury happened. Maybe not glad, but like it taught him so much about himself, where like he was saying how he has a new appreciation for his wife taking care of their son. He's like, man, that kid is a handful. So he like appreciates that time with his kid more. He appreciates the effort it takes to be a day-to-day parent, because otherwise, he is, but, like, he's always here.
Yeah.
And then he was, like, acknowledging those who help with the Grady Gibbs Foundation and all the effort that goes in there. And then he starts talking about his backyard's being redone, and it started at the same time as his rehab. And they're still working. And he's like, everybody works hard at their job, and I'm blessed that my heart is football. It's a game. And that self-awareness was incredible in and of itself. And then he starts talking about the game itself. And he was like, as a player, I was able to watch it kind of like I'd watch film and it'd be analytical. But then he put himself in the fan shoes. And he's watching his teammates from the sideline, like while they're on the sideline, being like, how are they interacting with each other? What is my takeaway as a fan when maybe you see him throw a helmet or like shrug off a congrats? Or you see the opposite in a happy way, like people are congratulating each other. What is the message that gives about the team to the fans? And it's just his perspective on all of it. It was kind of like, wow, homeboy learned a lot.
Well, like that press conference.
Oh my gosh.
Well, that press conference is exactly why Grady Jarrett is the heart and soul of this organization. And he's going into year 10, and for a interior defensive lineman, that in and of itself is like, hoorah for you, man.
And he only missed 3 games until the injury.
Right. This is not something he's ever dealt with before. He's never dealt with a season-ending injury. And so being able to be like, I learned a lot even going into year 10. And that's something he's always talked about. Even back in 2016, even back before then, he's like, I'm always learning. I'm always growing. And I always appreciate, I've said this before, I'll say it again, but like, I always appreciate the professional that Grady Jarrett is, but it's become more than that to this point. It's the person that Grady Jarrett is, and I think we saw the human emotions of what this injury was for him in the context of going into a decade with one team, your hometown team. That story is pretty incredible. And you hope for Grady Jarrett that the production in year 10 matches the magnitude of what it took for him to get here, not just over the course of this injury, but over the course of 9 years in Atlanta. But we got to move on because we're running out of time here. But I did want to talk our last note that we had about offseason takeaways. Amna Subhan, she wrote about the wide receivers. And it's a very interesting group. It's one of the groups that had the most turnover across the team just in general. The only person who at one point during this offseason, they only had one receiver who had caught a pass in 2023 on the roster, and that was Drake London, of course.
The lone wolf.
The lone wolf, as Terrin has talked about in previous questions of the week, if y'all have read it. But
he now has a full pack.
He has a full pack.
Every time you say that, I think of Alan from The Hangover. Like
the
giving,
wolf pack?
yeah, when he's just like giving that speech on the rooftop in the Vegas thing, and he's like, and now we are the wolves
like that
running
more than what I
together
picked up.
alone or whatever. It's so funny.
I think of Jack London's Call of the Wild.
Okay,
and then
well,
like
that's
Drake
a
London's
more
Call of the
literary,
Wild.
Right, yeah.
It's Drake London's Call of the Wild.
I like that.
Okay, so yeah, Terrin has
Analogy queen.
analogy about the Wolves and Drake London, and it's great. But what's really interesting is this group looks so different than what they have over the last 3 years in Arthur Smith's type of scheme. And that's because it's, again, to your point, LA influences. Yep. And I was actually talking to Darnell Mooney yesterday, our last day of camp, and I asked him about kind of where they were in install and where they felt. And obviously there's a lot of emphasis put on quarterback and wide receiver or tight end or running back because of Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. But there's a lot of emphasis on the relationship between pass catchers and your quarterback. And that's, during this time, that is something you can very much evaluate. And I found it very, very interesting, Darnell Mooney's response to kind of where he felt like they were in install. He's like, yeah, we feel good. I feel when Kirk and I are on the field together, if he's going to put it in the spot, I just need to make sure I get there. But what else he kind of talked about was this idea of spacing. And this was something that over the last few years, I had a almost like issue. I don't know if is the right word.
No, it's the right word.
It's the right word. I had an issue with the spacing of route trees and everything like that. And that is something, the fact that Darnell Mooney made the point to talk about spacing and how everybody, there's no one around me. Like, I got to beat my man. I'm not beating other people. And I found that to be so fascinating. It's something that I'm probably going to look more into and kind of look at Sean McVay's route trees because, you know, obviously they've had so much success with Matthew Stafford and all of the receivers that he's had at his disposal over the last few years. But that was something that was so fascinating when he's talking about spacing, because that immediately, when he said that, I was like, that's a difference between last year, the last couple of years, and where the Falcons are now. Maybe even from a schematic standpoint, with Zach Robinson bringing over that LA influence.
Yeah. I mean, you very rarely, I feel like, over the last couple of years, saw the Falcons catch a ball on the move in space. A lot of their routes were kind of stagnant at the end of their route. It was comebacks. It
for
was
whatever
curl
reason
routes.
too, you know, like because we don't know what's being asked and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, there were, like, to your point, like there were many times where the ball is thrown and it looks like two guys are kind of like running similar routes on top of each other. Like they're two guys underneath the basket boxing out to get the rebound. And that's not always what it is, at least in my mind. Again, we don't know what the play design is, what they're asked to do. That there may have been a very good reason for that. But when you look at the way that the Rams have used motion, the way that they have used kind of these crossing concepts to create just like wide open runners where you can get a long handoff to a guy in space as he rounds the corner, it's just going to be, I think, a little bit more of an explosive type of passing game. Less so like that ball control type of passing game that I think they have tended towards the last couple of years. And then when you look at the actual skill sets of the receivers they brought in, Darnell Mooney, Rondale Moore, Ray McLeod, there's something that Raheem Morris, when you ask about like his time as an assistant, when he was the receivers coach here, he used to always talk about, we want guys quick cuts, fast cuts, speed cuts, right? And that's what, when you look at like Darnell Mooney and the speed that he brings, when you look at Rondale Moore and kind of the underneath prowess that he has in manipulating zone defense.
All these guys run sub 4.5.
Yeah, like they're fast. They're really fast
they're
guys.
6 foot and below, I'll run sub 4.5s.
Yep.
That, I mean, immediately as soon as they got him, it's like that's going to be something to take note of.
Well, that was a priority for sure because I think it was a few weeks ago I sat with Ike Hillard for at least 15, 20 minutes. Sorry, other assistants. And he went through the entire wide receiver room essentially. Yeah. And the one thing they all had in common was speed. He's like, we want to be a fast group. Mm-hmm. Speed is a priority. And I think that'll complement the space very well. You can't really have space if you don't have speed.
There you go.
I love that.
Well, I mean, and here's the thing, too. Let's say this right now. It's not like the Falcons are going to be throwing the ball around the yard 80% of the game.
I don't know. Drake London said ball going to be in the air.
So did
yesterday.
Darnell Mooney. But you can't tell me that they're not going to run the crap out of the ball because you have – here's the thing, too. I say this, you can't go too far. You all want to implement, everybody wants to implement their own scheme. Zach Robinson wants to implement his own scheme. And it very much differs from the scheme that was here previously, where it was very run heavy, run first. It was, we're going to bulldoze you at the line of scrimmage. But the thing is, this offensive line is built for that.
That's true.
That is what they do best. They are one of the best and most experienced run blocking groups, I would argue, in the league. You have two incredibly talented running backs in Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. That still is an asset. Mm-hmm. You still have this piece, even though we're talking about the receivers and we're talking about the speed and we're talking about Kirk Cousins getting the ball downfield. all of that still is going to matter, but don't think for a second that they're going to get completely away from what their bread and butter has been the last 3 years, which is we're going to hand the ball off and we're going to have Tyler Algier run over people.
Dare I say balance?
That's what
Options.
they want to be. No, that's what they want to be. That's what everybody wants to be. You want to be a balanced offense.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the hope is that you're looking for increased efficiency, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to totally
go one way or the other.
Way or the other, right? To pass heavy, run heavy. But what you want is when you choose to pass, you're getting explosives. When you choose to run, you're getting 4, 5, 6 yards because you're doing it at advantageous times. The Falcons have faced so many heavy boxes because of the lack of that real threatening passing game. And so maybe the balance, they're not going to get away from the run, but maybe we see even more of an effective run game, even if the attempts are dialed back a little bit, but the efficiency ticks up.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fantastic first podcast with Will. Not our first podcast, but officially welcome to the team. Welcome to the Ticketmaster Studios. This has been a great conversation. We're going to take probably a little bit of a break along with the players and the coaches too. We get some time off in the summer, but we will be back in full force in training camp. And unfortunately, fans can't come out to training camp. Yeah. But I promise you, we're going to be in this podcast studio and we're going to be talking about what we're seeing at training camp and gearing up for the season. And I really hope that you follow along. You can make sure and check all of our stuff out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. But I think that's it for us for right now. But we'll be back in probably another month with some training camp updates for you guys. So thank you so much for joining us. For Terrin and Will, I'm Tori. And yeah, we'll see you soon. We'll see you at training camp.